Today I'm going to change out the U-joints on my Ford Ranger. The U-joints are on the drive shaft, which goes from the transmission to the rear differential, rear axle. They can cause a bunch of problems. My truck's been vibrating really bad when I get up to about 60 miles an hour. It's occasionally been making like a clunk or a pop when I go into gear. This should fix that, so we'll see. We want to crawl under the truck and locate the drive shaft and the U-joints. Do that. Okay, this guy along the top, that's the drive shaft. That's where it goes into the transmission. And that's the U-joint. There is the rear of it where it goes into the rear axle. Okay, the first thing you want to do is crawl under and check for play in the drive shaft. This will let you know if the U-joints are going bad. Should be able to grab a hold of it and twist it. It really shouldn't move that much. If it does, then your U-joints are most likely bad. Okay, the first thing you want to do is really important. Mark your drive shaft position. If you forget to do this, or you wipe your marks off and you put it back on wrong, it can cause a whole bunch of problems. And then you have to take it back off and figure out, kind of trial and error, how it came off, and it's no fun. So use a grease marker. I'm gonna use a gold paint pen. Just mark it. Okay, this is the rear of the drive shaft. That's where you're gonna be taking the bolts off of. The front part will just slide out once those are off. This is going to separate from this. You want to put this back on this exactly in the position that it came off. So I'm going to take my paint marker. I'm going to mark what's coming off, where it came off of. Just a line. That way when you put it back, you match that line to that line. This is the front U-joint. Goes into the transmission right here. You're going to want to mark this guy too. Basically the same way. That guy is going to match to that guy. Easy enough. Really important though. And now that you've marked your drive shaft position, front and back, you're going to take off the 4 bolts that are holding the drive shaft in, where it goes into the rear axle. I recommend spraying them first. They're going to be really hard to get off, and you really don't want to break them or strip them. It's a really big headache. So make sure you do that. It'll really help you out. So let's take these 4 bolts off. These are the 4 bolts right here. 1, 2, 3, and then the fun one that's up in the top corner. I've sprayed them already. Hopefully they come off pretty easy. Okay, so the WD-40 didn't work. I had to go and purchase some of this magic PB blaster. It's like WD-40 times a million, and it'll keep you from breaking off or stripping bolts. Okay, let's see if the PB blaster worked, and try not to scorch myself because I just had to drive to the store. The muffler is really fucking hot, so it's not a good burn. These guys are pretty thoroughly soaked. They've been soaking for about maybe 10-15 minutes now with PB blaster. Let's try not to break them off. Okay, finally broke all 4 bolts free. Didn't break any, didn't strip any. At this point, you're going to double check your marks that you made earlier to make sure that your drive shaft goes back in the same position that it came out. Double check those and then take the bolts all the way out. Okay, the marks are marked. Make sure it goes back in and all lines up. That's the front where it goes into the transmission. The rear, where it goes into the rear axle, straight line all the way across from the drive shaft to where it meets up. Just make sure those line back up when you put it back up. And And the bolts, I've already loosened them up. It should come out pretty easy at this point. Should be able to grab it with my hand now. There's one. Got the second one. Pick it up with my hand at this point. There's two. I think the other ones are pretty hand tight right now. Just get it to where we can. Okay, all four bolts are out. Now's the fun part where you have to separate the drive shaft from the rear axle. It should just come right off, but it's not going to because it's been on there a long time. I'm gonna use a screwdriver and a rubber mallet and try to loosen it up a little bit. Be careful, don't drop it on your face because it'll fall on your face. You don't want to drop it on your face. Make sure your marks are still there and pretty clear, and just kind of tap it, and hopefully it will drop off. Make sure that you catch it. All the bolts are out, the marks are still there. Let's try to separate it. Alright, it came off pretty easy. It's pretty much free now. What you want to do is kind of tilt it downward and let it sit on the ground. The drive shaft is out. The back end is sitting on the ground. The front end is still in the transmission. Okay, you're going to want to lift it a little bit and slide it back. And it should drop right out. The drive shaft is out. This is the front part. This is the shaft that goes into the transmission. This is the U-joint. Really shouldn't be like that loose. And these little rubber seals look pretty old. These are probably the factory U-joints that came on it in 2004. So we're definitely going to switch those out. And this is the back one. It's my mark. Super loose. This one, it goes up and down. It has a little bit of resistance, but it's not very smooth. There's a bunch of tiny little needle bearings inside these little caps. It should have a smooth, like fluid movement. This does not, so I'm gonna replace it. Okay, the first step is gonna be to take out these snap rings right here. It's a lot easier if you actually have snap ring pliers. I do not. So you can use needle nose pliers. These look like they're going to be pretty stuck in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray them with PB Blaster first. Just be really careful not to wipe off your marks because you're going to need those later. Just PB Blast these snap rings, get them loosened up. Do it on both ends. Both sides are going to have snap rings. Let this sit a little bit. Should come out pretty easy now. Snap ring. And your new joints should come with new snap rings, so don't worry about messing them up or losing them. Once the snap rings are out, you're going to want to take a smaller socket. I'm using an 18. And then in the bottom, you're going to want to use a bigger socket. I'm using a 1 1/16. Just kind of line them up and put the clamp on them. And as you twist, in theory, the bearing cap should pop out into this bottom socket. Just keep twisting and eventually you'll feel the bearing cap pop out. Take the sockets, there you go, your bearing's half out. And it's out. Okay, half the bearing is out. Let's pull these bearing caps off and check out the needle bearings. There's a whole bunch of tiny needle bearings all inside of there. They spin around. These look pretty gnarly. The grease is pretty black. So I'm pretty sure that's the problem. Let's get the other half of the U-joint out of here. So we're going to get the other half of the bearing out. Just do the same thing as you did before. Line up the upper and the lower, smaller socket, and then a bigger socket on the bottom. Just basically push it out into the bigger socket. You can use a hydraulic press, but I don't have that, so this is how it's going to go. Okay, the old U-joint is out. It's pretty gnarly. This is the new U-joint. It's all pretty. Compare them, make sure they're the same size. Make sure the caps line up. Yep, same exact size. The new one has a Zerk fitting where you can add grease to it. The old one doesn't. These probably came on the truck in 2004, so it's about time for them to be replaced. The first thing you're going to do in reinstalling them is pull these little caps off. Be really careful and really gentle. It's filled with needle bearings. You don't want them to come out of place or come out. Put this in a safe place where it's not going to get anything in it. Go ahead and do the same thing on the opposite side. Really careful. All the needle bearings are intact. Put it in a safe place. You're going to take this guy and put it up through here. It's going to sit like that. Take one of your caps and push it through off to one side. Line it up and get it to start. It'll fit basically right back on. You've got one side in. You're going to line up the other cap and slide it off to the other side. Just be careful. Don't let it fall out of the other cap. You'll mess up your needle bearings. You might end up bending one when you're putting it back in. Once you have your U-joint sitting in the caps, line it up with the smaller socket and the other side of the clamp and just slowly twist them. Get your clamp situated, start turning till you feel the pops. There'll be a few. This clamp's gonna pop off before the next pop. Maybe not. Put this other guy in. There you go. Okay, the caps are set. Okay, you're going to line your clamp up top and bottom with the 18 socket. Make sure it's on the caps. Just twist till it pops. There you go. And flip it and do the other side. You want to make sure it's below the ridge where the snap ring is going to go, or else you're going to be fighting all day getting these snap rings in. There we go. That's another pop. Snap ring should fit in that ridge just fine. So we'll flip it. Line the socket up on the opposite side. There you go. That's your second pop. It is below the ridge line. The snap ring will fit in. Turn it and do it 2 more times. Now that the caps are back on, the U-joint is in, we're going to put these new snap rings on. Your U-joints will come with it. Don't reuse the old ones. I'll do this without putting my eyeball out. Maybe. Yeah, that went in pretty easy. We'll put the snap ring on the other side. This is up a little bit high. So we're going to take the socket from the bottom because there's already a snap ring in it. So it's not going to go too far. And you're just going to want to push this cap down a little bit. There you go. That probably should be it. See if the snap ring will go in easy. Now that the new U-joints are on, you're going to need to grease them. It's probably easier before you put the drive shaft back on. grease in until it basically shoots back out. Should be good. It's kind of coming out around the bearing. Now we're going to reinstall the drive shaft, line up the marks that you made earlier. And I want to slide the front shaft in. It's got splines on it, so it should match right back up where your mark is. Should be matched up. The drive shaft's back in. It's lined up to the marks it came off on. I just hand tightened the 4 bolts in. I'm going to tighten them down with the ratchet to the torque specs, and then we should be done. Kind of just want to go around and tighten them down so that way they're even before you go really tightening them on. Okay, that's how you change the U-joints on a Ford Ranger. Look out for more of car videos. I'll be posting soon.